In this recording, we are going to see how the calculations are carried out by the system in the Sanity Check use case. Very important to mention that this use case will be carried out totally using the version unconstrained planning. This means that all the information from the base version has to be copied over to the unconstrained planning version in order to carry out these calculations. We are going to see how the information is fed to the supply chain planning operator, what are the outputs and how those outputs are used in order to continue the midterm supply planning in other versions. First, on the left side, we can see the three of the different key figures that are used to enter the demand in the supply chain operator. Previously, we have discussed in detail how the committed volume, captive volume, and the enriched value from the sales force are used to input the consensus demand that eventually is going to be fed into the supply chain operator. After the supply chain operator is run, one of the key outputs of the planning operator will be the constraint demand. It will be the constraint demand, the level in which the plan can satisfy the original demand. However, in the sanity check, only the heuristic supply chain operator will be used. That means it is going to be an unconstrained plan, and because of that, the constraint demand will be equal to any demand that is input into the supply chain operator. Let's review this with an example. First, the committed volume is entered. As we have seen, also the values for the enrichment are going to be entered in the system. The negative report will adjust as much as possible the information to create an alignment between the consensus demand and the committed volume. This again will be fed to the unconstrained sales forecast and to consensus demand. Also, captive volume will be entered. This is for a different type of customer, captive customers. However, eventually, both demands are going to make it to the consensus demand, as previously shown. At the same time, the captive volume and the committed volume are going to be entered into the minimum constraint demand to assign the correct priority. The free pot is going to be calculated in the same way as previously described before. This will be the input to the supply chain operator that is going to be run for the sanity check use case. Other inputs, of course, are considered in the supply chain operator, but for the purpose of this example, we're going to stick with these values. Because the supply chain operator that is going to be run for the sanity check is a heuristic, all the demands will be satisfied. It will be written, that information, in the constraint demand by the heuristic. At this time, it's important to remark that the consensus demand at this point of time doesn't really have location information. It's just at the customer product. However, the constraint demand contains already the location which is going to be used to satisfy that demand. That location is determined by the customer sourcing ratio. However, the captive volume and the committed volume already are assigned to a minimum constraint demand, which indeed contains allocation information already. It is important at this point of time that the captive and the committed volume are aligned in terms of customer sourcing ratio so that they can arrive to the same location, which is determined by the customer sourcing ratios. After running the supply chain operator with heuristic, the system is going to write the constraint demand. Again, because this is unconstrained planning, we can expect that all the demands are fulfilled by the system. The key objective of the sanity check is to obtain, after the heuristic has been run, the values of the key figure demand at proximity plan. These key figures will be obtained by executing a copy operator that copies the value from the constraint demand to the demand at proximity plan. So with the execution of the copy operator, the values in the demand at proximity plan will be filled. What is important at this point of time is to remember that the demand at proximity plan will remain constant through all the steps in the supply plan for the midterm. That means that when we run the optimizer for each plant, or for all plants, which is the last step, the demand at proximity plan will be always the same as when we ran the heuristic. That is useful to have a comparison of the original planning situation on an unconstrained basis against the plans that are calculated by the optimizer and may have cuts. The cuts and pushes, for that matter, in the supply plan will always be calculated against the demand at proximity plan. In this case, also, it's important to remember that the heuristic will calculate a capacity utilization percentage that the planner can interpret to see if there is a need to make any adjustment in the inputs to the supply plan. It could be on the demand side for the committed volume or the captive volume, or even some adjustments to the target stocks, which are having an impact in the capacity utilization. Let's do another example for what would be considered an unlikely exception, but anyway, the system has to be able to execute correctly the following scenario. Let's say we start with the committed volume 10 and 5. The enriched value will be 9 and 4. Negative free pot will do the best to correct the situation. However, it's going to fall short at some point in time. Also, some captive volume will be involved. At the end, the system will have the consensus demand of 10, 3, 6, and 4. The minimum constraint demand still will have the full values from committed and captive. As we explained before, in this situation, the free pot will not be negative because a special calculation in IBP will prevent that. And captive customers will never have a free pot. In this case, the constraint demand will be 10 for the first customer product combination and 5 for the second one. Even if the consensus demand is just 3, because the minimum constraint demand is following the original committed volume for the second combination, the system will make sure that all the committed volume is planned. Again, when executing the copy operator, the values of constraint demand are going to be passed to the demand at proximity plan. It is important then to notice that the demand at proximity plant will contain the highest from the minimum constraint demand or the consensus demand. This will allow to carry over these values to all the phases in the supply plan calculation. This means that for the system, this delta in committed volume is not a push to the plan because committed volume is considered as part of the original demand, and because of that, that should not be considered a push. Other situations will lead to some push, but not this one. This heuristic calculation in the supply run will lead again to a specific capacity utilization percentage that in this case because the free pot is less than in the previous example, we may represent it as a 97% capacity utilization. Again, very important, the demand at proximity plant that we have obtained in this heuristic run, copying the constraint demand to the demand at proximity plant, will be carried over to the next planning steps. However, the constraint demand may certainly change because the optimizer will make some cuts in some demands based on the available capacity. That is the hard constraint that the optimizer always will follow. There can be an additional situation where calculations need to be changed in order to obtain the most value of the sanity check. Let's go back to the first example and the original values in that example. In that case, we had committed volume of 10 for the first combination, 5 for the second combination. The enrichment was 9 and 8. Calculated demand stayed at 10 and 7. And captive volume remained at 6 and 4. In this case, the consensus demand will carry over the values. We have seen that with these figures, the capacity utilization may be around 100%. At this point of time, because the main objective of the sanity check is make sure that the captive volume, committed volume, and also the stock targets can be fulfilled for a particular plant. If the planner feels that there is an extra need to make sure that this is the case based on a given demand, this analysis is not enough, because here the free pot that is calculated is also being factored in the capacity utilization. So if the planner really wants to make sure that the sanity check is completely okay for this plant, he can do a different set of calculations. In this case, the planner can execute a different set of copy operators that will fill the consensus demand not with the values of the calculated demand, but with the values of the committed volume and the captive volume. That indeed will allow the planner to execute the plan and see the capacity utilization figures for only the captive and committed volume, and the targets, of course, and the stock targets. This can allow him to better evaluate with a great deal of precision if the capacity is enough to comply with all the captive, committed, and targets. Probably this is a situation that is not going to be happening a lot because, again, the guidelines for committed volume are that they're not going to exceed the 60% of the capacity, or sorry, the 60% of the enriched demand. But in any case, if they want, they can have this special calculation. It's important that when this alternative calculation of the demand is used, it is only for the planner to look at the capacity utilization that comes after these figures, but this result should not be used to copy the constraint demand to the demand at proximity plan, because the demand at proximity plan should always come from the calculated demand and the minimum constraint demand set by the captive and committed volume. When the planner uses this alternative calculation, the group operators that are used to close the work in the unconstrained version will again calculate the constraint demand based on the normal calculations and will calculate the demand at proximity plant again based on the regular calculations that are defined. Then this situation is a special one, should be used only when the planner has a specific concern that the capacity will not be enough to satisfy captive, committed, and targets. Otherwise, it should not be used.